Her husband's affair shattered her, leaving her broken and betrayed. But what came next, her revenge, was a twist no one could have predicted. It wasn't just payback, it was a game changer. You won't believe how this story unfolds. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping revenge stories like this. It all started with a feeling, that gnawing suspicion in the pit of her stomach that something was wrong. Sarah had always trusted Mark, her husband of 5 years, with everything. He was the love of her life, the father of their 2 children, and the person she thought she would grow old with. But something had changed in their relationship recently. The late nights at work, the unexplained absences, the lack of affection. Sarah couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, Sarah decided to confront Mark. She was prepared for a tough conversation, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to discover. She had just returned home from picking up the kids from school when she noticed something odd. Mark's phone was left unattended on the kitchen counter. Normally, he would never leave it out in the open, but today, it was right there, face up. Curiosity got the best of her, and she picked it up. As she scrolled through his messages, her heart sank. Texts between Mark and her own sister, Emma, filled the screen. They were too intimate, too suggestive. It was clear they had been having an affair for months, possibly even longer. Sarah's hands trembled as she read each word, the betrayal stabbing at her heart. She felt the weight of the world crashing down on her as she tried to process what she had just uncovered. Her husband, the man she trusted more than anyone, had not only betrayed her, but he had done so with her sister, the one person she had always been closest to. It felt like a cruel joke, an unimaginable betrayal. Sarah's mind raced. What should she do now? Should she confront them immediately? Or should she wait and plan her next move carefully? She was torn between rage and heartbreak, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning of her journey. She wouldn't let this betrayal go unpunished. The next few days were a blur. Sarah couldn't bring herself to talk to Mark or Emma. She locked herself in her bedroom, crying, angry, and deeply hurt. But the anger eventually transformed into determination. She couldn't let them get away with this. She wasn't going to let her sister's betrayal destroy her any more than it already had. Sarah was ready to take control. She knew that revenge wasn't about just getting back at them. It was about reclaiming her power. And that's exactly what she intended to do. She began to plan, calculating every move, every conversation, every step that would lead her to the ultimate payback. But first, she needed a little more information. She needed to know just how deep the affair went, and whether Emma was truly the mastermind behind it all. Sarah started following Emma's movements. She paid attention to every word she said, every excuse she made, and every slip-up that could reveal the truth. It was time for Sarah to turn the tables. She wasn't going to let the people she trusted the most destroy her family and her peace of mind. She had always been the kind, forgiving person, but now she was going to show them a side of her they had never seen before. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but as the initial shock wore off, clarity began to emerge. She knew she couldn't let her emotions control her every move. She had to be strategic. This was more than just payback. It was about taking back her life, her self-worth, and her peace of mind. She needed a plan, a careful and calculated course of action that would expose the betrayal and show Mark and Emma just how deep their wrongdoings ran. The first step in her plan was to gather more evidence. Sarah knew that confronting Mark without undeniable proof would only make her appear irrational or vengeful. And she wasn't going to let that happen. She needed solid, irrefutable proof of their affair. Proof that she could use to her advantage. For the next few days, she quietly observed Mark's behavior, keeping a close eye on his phone, his movements, and his interactions with Emma. The more Sarah observed, the more she realized how much Mark had been hiding. He was distant, acting as if everything was normal while continuing the affair behind her back. The betrayal was not just in the texts and late nights, but in the lies he told her and their children every day. Meanwhile, Sarah started to notice the small signs of Emma's guilt. She tried to cover it up with fake smiles and overcompensating apologies, but Sarah could see right through it. Emma's behavior was shifting, and Sarah knew that her sister was beginning to feel the weight of her actions. But what Emma didn't realize was that Sarah had already planned the next step in her scheme. It was time to confront them, but not in the way they expected. Sarah arranged for a family gathering at their house, inviting Mark, Emma, and a few other family members under the guise of a casual reunion. It was a move that took them by surprise, especially because Sarah had been distant and reserved for the past week. She knew this would disarm them, making them feel comfortable enough to slip up or even confess. The day of the gathering arrived, and Sarah made sure everything was set. She dressed carefully, wearing a simple but elegant outfit that exuded confidence and strength. She was no longer the broken woman who had discovered the affair. She was someone entirely different. This new Sarah was determined, focused, and in control. She wasn't going to let her sister or her husband control her life any longer. As the family reunion progressed, Sarah carefully observed Mark and Emma's interactions. She watched as they exchanged glances, whispered to each other, and attempted to keep their distance. The guilt was palpable, but Sarah kept her composure. She knew that the time for confrontation was nearing. When the evening was drawing to a close and everyone had started to leave, Sarah made her move. She casually asked Emma and Mark to stay behind for a moment. The rest of the family members were already saying their goodbyes, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. Once everyone had left, Sarah calmly walked into the living room and stood in front of her husband and sister. There was a long, tense silence as they exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what Sarah was about to do. But Sarah wasn't going to let them control the situation anymore. She spoke slowly, deliberately, her voice steady with a calm that reflected both her anger and her resolve. "I know everything," she said quietly. "I know about the affair. I know about all the lies, the deceit, and the betrayal. But this, what's happening right now, isn't going to be the end of it. It's only the beginning." Mark's face turned pale, his lips trembling as he stammered for an explanation. Emma looked away, her guilt written all over her face. But Sarah was no longer interested in hearing their excuses or apologies. She had made her decision, and it was time for them to face the consequences. "I've decided that I'm done," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Done with being lied to. Done with being treated like I don't matter. But I'm not going to make this easy for either of you. You both have underestimated me for far too long." Sarah paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Mark and Emma were silent, their eyes wide with fear. They knew something was coming, but neither could have anticipated the full scope of Sarah's plan. Sarah wasn't just going to expose their betrayal, she was going to make sure they would never forget the consequences of their actions. Sarah's heart raced as she watched Mark and Emma squirm under the weight of her words. The shock on their faces was evident. Neither of them had expected her to confront them so directly. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She knew that this moment, this confrontation, was only the beginning of the transformation she was about to orchestrate. "Here's the thing," Sarah continued, her voice unwavering. "I've done a lot of thinking, and I've realized something. You two are not the only ones who have a future. I have my own life to live, and I'm going to make sure it's one that doesn't involve either of you. But what happens next will affect more than just our marriage. It will affect your lives, your reputations. And trust me, that's something I won't let you walk away from without consequences." Mark was starting to get defensive. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah raised a hand, silencing him. "You had a choice, Mark. You could have been honest with me. You could have been a man about it and told me the truth. But you didn't. You chose to cheat. And Emma, I never imagined you'd betray me like this. Of all people, my own sister. But now? Now it's my turn. You've stolen my trust, my dignity, and my peace. And I'm going to make sure that you pay for it." Sarah wasn't just speaking from a place of anger. She had spent the past few days thinking everything through. She knew she had the upper hand now. They had no idea just how much power she held. Her plan had been carefully devised, and it was time to execute it flawlessly. She had always been the calm and composed one, and now it was her time to show that composure could be just as deadly as any outburst of rage. Mark and Emma might have thought they had the upper hand, but Sarah was about to make them regret everything. Her first move was simple. She would expose their affair, but she wouldn't do it in the way they expected. Instead of an angry confrontation that would only make her seem vindictive, she was going to use the one thing that would hit them where it hurt the most: their reputation. The family reunion had been a small glimpse into the social circles they both frequented. They were well known in the community, highly respected, and had carefully crafted images of loyalty and trust. But Sarah knew better. She knew how much their image mattered to them. She knew that their business relationships, social circles, and friendships depended on the facade of their perfect lives. She had already done her homework. Sarah had discreetly gathered information from Mark's contacts, business partners, and mutual friends without raising any suspicion. She had saved every message, every phone call, and every piece of evidence that linked them together. She had compiled a dossier, complete with timestamps, photographs, and even video recordings of their secret meetups. But Sarah wasn't going to release all of it at once. No, she had a more refined approach. Her first step would be a subtle revelation, a social media post, something seemingly innocent but filled with the right hints. She would use the same platform that had once celebrated her marriage to reveal the truth. A carefully crafted post, with just the right words, could unravel everything for them. She knew Mark's business partners would see it. She knew that the people who admired him would suddenly question everything they thought they knew about him. The same went for Emma. She had spent years building her reputation as someone trustworthy, loyal, and honorable. That would all come crashing down. As Sarah walked toward the living room, Mark and Emma still sitting in stunned silence, she felt a rush of empowerment. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. They had used her, betrayed her, and now it was time to use the tools at her disposal to show them what it meant to lose everything. Sarah turned back to face them, her eyes cold and calculating. By the end of this week, everyone you know will know what you've done. And no matter how hard you try to deny it, the truth will be out there. You won't be able to hide anymore. For a moment, there was complete silence. Mark looked as though he might argue, but he was speechless. Emma, her face pale, glanced at Sarah in shock. Both of them were beginning to understand that Sarah had no intention of backing down. She had prepared for this. She had calculated every move. "You may have thought you could destroy me," Sarah said, her voice low and steady. "But what you don't realize is that I am stronger than both of you combined. I'm not the victim here. I'm the one who will come out on top. You'll see." With that, Sarah turned her back on them, walking toward the door. She had done what she needed to do. The first step of her revenge was complete, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the full weight of her plan would crush them both. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling a strange sense of calm. The night had been long, filled with restless thoughts about the next steps of her revenge. But now, she was certain. She had laid the groundwork, and now it was time for her plan to unfold. She had always been cautious, and her social media presence had been carefully curated over the years. For the most part, her posts were family-oriented, showcasing her life with Mark and their children. But now, Sarah was about to turn that very platform, the one that had once painted a picture of happiness, into a weapon. With a few clicks, she carefully crafted her post. It wasn't anything too overt, just a simple image of a family reunion photo from years ago, one where Sarah and her husband looked incredibly happy. In the caption, she wrote, "It's funny how things change. You think you know someone, that they're your partner in life, your best friend, and then something shifts. Life's lessons come in the strangest ways. Stay true to yourself, no matter what. Family, trust, loyalty." At first glance, it seemed innocent enough, but the timing and the subtlety of the words carried weight. She knew Mark would see it, as would Emma, and it was a message only they would truly understand. It wasn't just a post, it was a declaration. Sarah wasn't simply airing her grievances to her friends or followers. She was planting the seed of truth, and from there, the story would unravel. Within minutes, Mark texted her. "What is this about?" His message was blunt, clearly annoyed. Sarah stared at the screen for a moment, letting the silence stretch before typing back with her response. You know exactly what it's about, Mark. Your actions speak louder than any words ever could. It's time everyone else saw you for who you truly are. The tension that had hung between them for the past few days had now reached a boiling point. He knew she wasn't just angry anymore. She had taken control of the situation, and the first step in her revenge had been successfully executed. But Sarah didn't stop there. She knew that Mark's circle of friends, colleagues, and business partners would see the post. He had carefully crafted his public persona over the years as a dedicated, loving husband, a loyal man. Now, with the click of a button, Sarah had begun to chip away at that carefully constructed image. It wasn't just about hurting him emotionally, it was about exposing him, making him confront the consequences of his betrayal in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. Sarah had also been careful to make sure her sister Emma wasn't left out. Emma was already spiraling from guilt, but seeing the post only deepened her fear. Emma had known what they were doing was wrong, but now she had to live with the reality that everyone, family, friends, colleagues, would see the truth. Emma reached out to Sarah almost immediately. Her text read, "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Please, let's talk." Sarah read the message and felt no sympathy. She had heard Emma's apologies 1,000 times before. She had forgiven her time and time again, but this was different. This time, Sarah wasn't interested in reconciliation. She wasn't interested in playing the victim anymore. She was taking control. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Mark. "You're making a huge mistake. We've talked about this. I love you, and I never wanted to hurt you. Please, don't do this." The messages came flooding in, but Sarah stood firm. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her anymore. She wasn't going to be swayed by his charm or his attempts to play the victim. He had made his choice, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. The hours passed, and Sarah's post began to gain traction. Her friends, family, and acquaintances started commenting and asking questions, some of them expressing their shock and concern. But Sarah didn't care about their questions. She didn't care if they judged her or questioned her decisions. The only thing that mattered now was the truth, and she had set it free. Later that evening, she saw that Mark had posted a cryptic message on his own social media. "I'm sorry for the hurt I've caused. Sometimes life isn't as perfect as it seems. But we're stronger than this. Always." It was a desperate attempt to control the narrative, to make it look like he was the victim in this situation. But Sarah could see through it. She knew exactly what he was trying to do, and she wasn't going to let him rewrite the story. At this point, the damage was done. Mark and Emma's secret was no longer just a secret. It was out in the open, and everyone who mattered to them knew the truth. Sarah had exposed them both, and they were now facing the consequences of their actions. But this was only the beginning. The post had shaken their world, but Sarah wasn't done yet. The social media post was just the first step in her revenge, one that would cause Mark and Emma to lose everything they had built, just like they had done to her. The ripple effect of Sarah's social media post spread quickly. What had started as a subtle message to Mark and Emma had now become a public spectacle. Their friends, colleagues, and family had begun to pick up on the tension, the whispers, and the hidden truth that Sarah had made impossible to ignore. Mark's carefully curated life, built around the image of a perfect family man, was crumbling before his eyes. The first blow came from his business partners. They had always admired Mark, trusted him, and respected his dedication. But now they were questioning everything. One of his biggest clients, a high-profile corporate firm, canceled their partnership within hours of the post going live. They had no official reason, but it was clear they didn't want to be associated with someone who had been publicly exposed for infidelity. That was just the beginning. Within days, other clients and associates followed suit, pulling back from Mark's projects, leaving him in a state of professional isolation. The phone calls were relentless, but they weren't the kind of calls he was used to. Instead of offers of new opportunities, he was met with questions, with silence, and, worst of all, with disinterest. The respect he had once commanded from his peers had evaporated, and in its place was a growing sense of doubt and suspicion. No one wanted to get caught up in a scandal. Mark was no longer the man they looked up to. Meanwhile, Emma's life was unraveling in ways she hadn't anticipated. At first, she had tried to justify her actions to herself, convincing herself that she had made a mistake and that everything would be fine if she just kept her head down. But as Sarah's post gained momentum, Emma was flooded with messages from friends, family, and acquaintances asking if the rumors were true. Her perfect image of the devoted daughter, the trustworthy sister, and the upstanding woman had been shattered. Emma tried to keep a brave face, but every time she walked into a room, she could feel the weight of judgment bearing down on her. Her parents, who had once seen her as the model daughter, were now giving her cold stares and distant words. Their disappointment was palpable, and Emma couldn't bear to face it. She had lost their trust, and Sarah's words were now ringing in her ears. But what hurt the most was the one thing she never expected: the silent treatment from Mark. While he was dealing with his own fallout, Emma's betrayal seemed to hit him harder than anything else. He had been the one to lead her into this mess, but now, in the face of public scrutiny, he wasn't stepping up. Instead, he withdrew into himself, focusing on trying to repair his reputation rather than addressing the damage they had caused. Emma realized, with a crushing clarity, that she had been nothing more than a pawn in his life, a tool he had used when it suited him. Now she was left to pick up the pieces alone. Sarah, on the other hand, was thriving. She felt a deep sense of empowerment as she watched Mark and Emma squirm. Her plan had worked better than she could have imagined. The truth was out there, and there was nothing Mark or Emma could do to stop it. Every step she took from here on out was part of the victory she had claimed for herself. She knew there was more to be done. Sarah had already begun making arrangements for her future, securing her financial independence and building a life that was hers and hers alone. But now she was also starting to think about the emotional victory. The wounds Mark and Emma had inflicted on her were deep, but with each passing day, Sarah felt those wounds begin to heal as she reclaimed control of her life. One afternoon, Sarah received a text from Mark. It was brief, yet desperate. "I'm sorry, I know I messed up. Please, let's fix this. We can move on together." She stared at the message for a moment. The audacity of his words shocked her. After everything, after the affair, the lies, the betrayal, he thought she would just forgive him and let it go? He wanted to pick up where they left off as if nothing had happened. But Sarah wasn't the same woman who had once loved him blindly. She had learned that forgiveness, when earned, was a powerful gift. But it was a gift she was not ready to give him. Not yet. Instead of replying immediately, Sarah took a deep breath and put her phone down. She knew that she had come too far to fall back into the trap of false hope. She had fought for her freedom, for her independence, and for her own peace of mind. She wasn't about to let Mark or Emma tear that down with a few empty words. It was time to move forward. But as she sat there, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The revenge had been sweet, but the real reward came from what lay ahead. The life she was building, the strength she had found, and the peace she had earned. Sarah felt the weight lift off her shoulders as the days went by. She had confronted the hardest part of her journey, discovering the truth, confronting her husband and sister, and dealing with the devastating betrayal. But now, she could finally breathe. She was no longer trapped in the cycle of pain, hurt, and revenge. Instead, she was focused on moving forward and building a life that was hers alone. A life that would define her success, her happiness, and her future. With Mark and Emma out of the picture, Sarah had one mission: to rebuild her life on her own terms. She had always been independent, but now she realized just how strong and resilient she truly was. She had been broken, but in that brokenness, she had discovered an inner power that she never knew she possessed. The first thing Sarah did was focus on her career. She had always put her ambitions aside to support Mark's career and maintain the family dynamic. But now, Sarah was putting herself first. She had always wanted to work in interior design, a field she was passionate about but had never fully pursued. Now, she was ready to dive in. Sarah enrolled in design courses, honed her skills, and built a portfolio. She spent countless hours learning, experimenting, and pushing herself to be the best version of herself. Slowly but surely, She started to build a name for herself in the industry. Her passion for design became her escape, a way to express herself creatively and emotionally. Each project she completed made her feel stronger, more confident, and more connected to the woman she had become. Her reputation in the design world grew quickly, and before long, she started receiving high-profile clients. As her business blossomed, she realized that the journey to rediscovering herself had been about more than just work. It had been about creating a future she could be proud of. And as the weeks and months passed, Sarah began to see the fruits of her labor. But while her career soared, her personal life remained just as important. Sarah took time to focus on her children, rebuilding the foundation of trust and love that had been shaken by the betrayal. She spent more time with them, taking them on adventures, sharing meaningful moments, and showing them what it meant to live with integrity and strength. The pain of the past would never disappear completely, but with each passing day, Sarah created new, happier memories with her children, ones that would last a lifetime. It wasn't just her family or career that Sarah focused on, it was her own personal growth. She began exercising regularly, taking care of her body, mind, and spirit. She joined yoga classes, meditated, and started reading books on self-love and personal development. Sarah was determined to be the best version of herself, emotionally, physically, and mentally. Meanwhile, Mark and Emma were still trying to put their lives back together, but the damage was done. Mark's business was in decline, and his reputation was permanently tarnished. His attempts to apologize were met with rejection. People in their social circle began to distance themselves from him, and business deals that once seemed secure fell apart. The guilt and shame that had once been hidden behind their facade were now glaringly obvious to everyone who had once trusted them. Sarah had watched it all unfold with a sense of satisfaction. She had exposed their betrayal, but now she realized that it wasn't about their downfall. It was about her rise. Her revenge wasn't just about making them suffer. It was about her triumph. She had taken control of her life and carved a new path forward, one where she was in the driver's seat. One day, Sarah was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping coffee and reviewing a new design proposal when she received a message from Mark. His text read, "I know I've lost everything, but I still regret what happened. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." She read the message, but her reaction was not one of anger or sadness. It was simply indifference. Sarah had moved on. She had forgiven herself, and that was all that mattered. She didn't need Mark's validation anymore. She had become her own validation. Sarah replied with a simple yet firm message. "It's too late for that, Mark. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same." As Sarah hit send, she smiled softly to herself. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was free. And that was all she had ever wanted. As Sarah looked out of the large windows of her newly renovated home, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The house, which had once been a symbol of betrayal and heartbreak, was now a sanctuary of self-love, growth, and achievement. It was hers. Every room, every corner, and every inch was a reflection of the woman she had become. The journey had been long, but it had been worth every step. From the moment she had discovered Mark's betrayal, Sarah had been broken, shattered into pieces. But through every challenge, every heartbreak, and every tear, she had rebuilt herself stronger than before. She had reclaimed her life, her confidence, and her happiness. The business she had started from the ground up was thriving. She was becoming a name to be reckoned with in the world of design, and the clients she worked with trusted her not only for her skill, but also for her integrity and strength. Sarah had become a force of nature, someone who others admired and respected. But it wasn't just her career that had blossomed. It was her sense of self. No longer the woman who had been blinded by love and loyalty, Sarah now stood proudly as someone who had learned to put herself first. Her children were thriving too, happy in the home that Sarah had fought to create for them. They had watched their mother go through the most difficult times, and now they saw her as a beacon of strength, resilience, and courage. She was teaching them that no matter what life threw at you, you could always rise again. Mark and Emma, on the other hand, had fallen into a much darker reality. While Sarah's life flourished, theirs continued to unravel. Mark's career was in tatters, and his once perfect reputation had been shattered beyond repair. Emma had lost her place in the family, and the support she had once received was now nothing more than a distant memory. They had destroyed their own lives through their selfishness, and Sarah had watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. For Sarah, the ultimate revenge wasn't in seeing Mark and Emma suffer. It was in her own success. The more she thrived, the more they realized they had underestimated her. She had turned their betrayal into her greatest opportunity for growth, and now Sarah was in control of her own destiny. As Sarah sat down to review new designs for an upcoming project, she couldn't help but smile. She had built something from nothing, a life filled with purpose, success, and peace. She had found her strength, and now she was unstoppable. Sarah's story shows us all that no matter how far we've fallen, we have the power to rise. What's stopping you from taking control of your own life and making it exactly what you want it to be? If you've been inspired by Sarah's strength and resilience, share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you handle betrayal? What steps are you taking today to reclaim your life? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that they can always start over, no matter what. It's time to take control. Your story is just beginning.